drugs across borders or in general. The death penalty is the ending of a criminal's life as punishment for committing the most heinous crimes. A punishment that is too harsh is one that is not proportionate to the scale and magnitude of the crime and is hence unjustified. This is our policy. Number 1, we do not support the death penalty for any drug trafficking offence. Number 2, we will only use the death penalty for intentional killings, according to the UN Rapporteur for extrajudicial killings. These include murder, terrorism, and public shootings. Number 3, instead, judges will have the discretion of using a range of jail terms up to life imprisonment for the most significant of drug offences. Finally, number 4, we will combat drugs through judicial reforms, such as improving consistency in enforcement and reducing the evidentiary burden of proof to make convictions easier. I will be speaking to you about proportionality and deterrence, while my second speaker, Vedant, will be speaking about how we ensure rehabilitation alongside opposition. Now, the thesis of my first argument is that the death penalty is disproportionately harsh compared to the crime of drug trafficking. We believe that the death penalty is only meant to be used for the most serious of crimes in society. The justice system uses punishments that are proportionate to the crime. This means punishments are based on the nature and severity of the specific crime and the harms it has caused. The unique quality of the death penalty is the permanent ending of a life. To justify this irreversible act of force, the criminal must have taken the lives of others. Drug trafficking is simply not comparable to these crimes, ladies and gentlemen. And why do we say so? Well, we do not deny that drug trafficking is bad, and we do not deny that it harms some citizens. However, even if drugs are harmful, drug traffickers do not directly take lives when they transport, produce, and sell drugs, unlike a premeditated murder or shooting. The act itself does not take the life, or directly cause a life to be lost. Furthermore, the average mule that smuggles a substance into a country has absolutely no intent or knowledge on killing intentionally. They are often poor, young, and from dysfunctional backgrounds, and their low education level makes them easily exploitable. Without this guilty intent, the mens rea, to take life, this act is nowhere near as heinous as outright murder. Now, ladies and gentlemen, one such example is Van Thuong, a drug trafficker who was executed in Singapore. He never meant to harm anyone, but was desperate to pay off debts brought about by his sick mother's medical fees and his brother's gambling problems. Ladies and gentlemen, this is true even for the upper levels of drug trafficking. Even when people die, these are accidental overdoses, where the addict is just as much to blame. In many cases, drug sellers have a powerful incentive not to kill their clients, as doing so will cut off a stream of reliable revenue. As such, the deaths that result are regrettable and unintended on the part of drug traffickers as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, what does this show us? This shows that drug trafficking might be very bad, but it is simply not among the worst, most heinous crimes in society. It is not bad enough to deserve the death penalty, and for 3 main reasons. Number 1, drug traffickers do not directly harm drug addicts. Number 2, drug traffickers have no evil intention to harm. And number 3, drug traffickers have a rational incentive not to end the lives of their clients. Ladies and gentlemen, for all these reasons, we believe that the death penalty is too harsh for drug traffickers. Moving on to my second substantive. The presumption here is that the death penalty is the harshest possible punishment, and hence it deters drug trafficking. Well, first, there is significant evidence that this deterrence does not even exist. Well, this is because in Thailand, which has the death penalty for drug trafficking, Thailand produces the second largest amount of illicit opium heroin, behind only Afghanistan, which also happens to have the death penalty for drug trafficking. Secondly, the death penalty does not change the incentives of drug traffickers as compared to life imprisonment, contrary to what team opposition seems to think. For the drug couriers, they are so desperately in need of cash to stay alive, and that they are forced to turn to crime, ladies and gentlemen. Not all drug traffickers, as team opposition would have it, are willing to turn to crime just even though they know it's bad. No, they are forced into it. Also, these drug traffickers tend to come from less developed countries, and because the payoff is so great, there will always be a substantial number of drug traffickers, more than what is required. So what does this mean now? This means that even if there are some drug traffickers who are deterred by the death penalty, there will always be more who are willing to take their place and replace them in exchange for money. Furthermore, drug-producing rings will respond accordingly by grooming and exploiting even more drug runners. They offer to pay drug runners much more to make the risk of death worth it. Also, in many cases, they even deceive couriers by not telling them what they are trafficking, or con them into believing the death penalty is not in strict use. Well, even if the death penalty deters people in theory, and we disagree with this, mind you, but even if it were true, it seldom works in reality. Finally, for drug producers and overlords, the death penalty will do little to deter their trafficking, because they tend to be based in less developed countries where enforcement is lax and they are unlikely to be convicted. For example, a drug lord in Cambodia is unlikely to be deterred by Singapore's death penalty because he knows he will never be arrested here if he is careful. Therefore, the deterrence is not linked to the harshness of the punishment per se, but instead the consistency of punishment. Legal research shows that criminals fear the act of being caught and convicted itself and don't really factor in the consequences of their punishment. Ladies and gentlemen, why is it more traffickers fear Singapore rather than Myanmar? It is the consistency of punishment. It is how often drug traffickers are caught. And for these reasons, it makes me very proud to propose.
Today, opposition believes that the death penalty is not too harsh, but rather justified in certain cases of drug traffickers. Our argument for today is not to prove that the death penalty should always be enforced, because we recognize there are always mitigating factors, like police assistance, like remorse, and economic errors. We think we're going to leave it to the judge's discretion to evaluate the circumstances and give an appropriate sentence, similar to how it's done in Singapore. Rather, our argument is to prove that the death penalty is a fair sentence that should be available to a justice system to punish drug traffickers that warrant it. To prove this, side opposition will be bringing you three substantive topics. I will be talking about, firstly, how the death penalty is a punishment proportionate to drug trafficking. Secondly, how it reduces drug supply to veterans. And my second speaker will be talking about the death penalty combats drug culture. But before that, let me rebut opposition's case. Firstly, a clarification. They came up and told us that there are countries that don't have the death penalty, but serve very low rates of drug abuse and drug trafficking. We say this is not the issue in this debate. The issue in the debate is whether the death penalty is justified. We say that if certain countries want to have the death penalty as an additional measure, we think it's perfectly justified for them to do so. Now, we are arguments. Firstly, whether the death penalty is proportionate, and secondly, life imprisonment versus death penalty. So firstly, is it proportionate? Slight opposition came and told us that no, it's not proportionate because drug traffickers don't take lives. And I'm going to rebut that in my substantive later on. I'll flag it out for you when I get there. Secondly, they came up and told us there was no evil intention. But we want to ask judges, what exactly is murderous intent? We think that murderous intent can also be understood as someone committing an act in unspeakable disregarding of consequences without any excuse. We think it doesn't necessarily have to be a premeditated killing intent. Moving on, they also told us that addicts are also to blame because they are the ones who choose to overdose. No addicts do not choose anything. Addicts have been addicted to drugs because the drugs fundamentally want their prey. They do not have a choice in this situation. They can't out explaining how drug traffickers additionally coerce addicts to take drugs in the first place. Moving on to life imprisonment versus deterrence. Thinking of it, life imprisonment has the same deterrence effect as the death penalty. We think no. Why? Because the death penalty is unique in a way that's irreversible, that's final, that once you are dead, there's literally nothing you can do to change it. We think that life is so important to everyone. We think that life is especially important to drug use they mentioned. So we don't think that these drug use they mentioned are going to risk their life and risk helping their family get more money just for this one job. Now I'll be moving on to my first substantive for today. How the death penalty is a punishment proportional to drug trafficking. So death penalty is justified in two instances. Firstly, with the crime causes death in the case of murder. Secondly, the crime causes systematic damage to society in the case of treason and espionage. We think drug trafficking fulfills both criteria. Let me explain how. Firstly, the drug trafficking causes death. Every year, 250,000 people die from illegal drug use. And drug traffickers are crucial distributors of the drugs that cause death. In doing so, we argue they contribute substantially to these deaths. A few reasons for this. army. This robs people of sense of security as well as resulting in a heavy toll on the blood. For example, in the United States, the drug trafficking is not punishable by death. $193 billion per year is lost to abuse. And like this massive harm, as long as citizens are protected, the government is justified in using death penalty. Yes, sir.
In the USA, the death penalty is in order for drug trafficking. The country is still struggling with drug abuse. So we don't see how your side serves to combat the
You
problem.
see, sir, in the US, the death penalty for drug trafficking is technically constitutionalized, but has never actually been enforced. So we think that US might as well not have any death penalty at all. Now let me move on to my second assignment on how the death penalty reduces drug supply to death rates. Firstly, it disincentivizes people from becoming drug traffickers. This is perceived as the worst thing by many people because it's irreversible because it attacks the basic instinct of self-preservation. Being dead eradicates any possibility for a better future. We think that drug traffickers aren't going to be so illogical as to treat all future opportunities for this one job. We think this is going to deter many people from becoming drug traffickers, but even if they're still going to be drug traffickers, they're going to demand a higher price of services to compensate for the risk of death. This brings me on to my second theory on how drug syndicate are less likely to operate in a country which is death penalty. When the investment comes to the pay for drug traffickers goes up, your revenue naturally goes up. We think drug organizations exist to make as much profit as possible. When a country becomes less limited and encounters drug laws to take their operation elsewhere, cutting off the drug supply to this country. Today I've proven how the death penalty is morally justified and protects society from the dangers of drugs. Go to side opposition.
I have three main points of contention in today's debate. Firstly, on their policy, which is the Singapore model. Secondly, on the harms they brought up. And thirdly, why they feel their side deserves to go forward. Let's go. So firstly, opposition told us that they would use the Singapore model of death penalty. Namely, that the death penalty will be used for all drug traffickers unless you are really a drug courier and you provide useful information to the authorities. First, we believe that at its worst, drug trafficking is simply not on the same scale or magnitude of harm as crimes like murder or terrorism. If the death penalty is to be meted out to drug traffickers, it is only because they have committed a worse crime to take a life in addition to drug trafficking. Hence, the punishment is too harsh even with discretion. Second, this is not practical because many drug mules do not have detailed information on the nature of the operation. This is because leaders of drug rings would want to minimize the exposure and risk of getting caught. Hence, they tell drug mules very little about the drugs and in some cases never even come in direct contact with them. This means that many drug mules will be unable to cooperate and provide useful information even if they were sincere about doing so. As a result, many will end up cruelly subjected to death penalty. This is unfair and inhumane for the drug mules because many of whom were coerced, forced, or caught into trafficking. The pregnant mother was caught into stuffing anonymous packets of heroin into a bag to make a buck. The 17-year-old struggling boy with medical debts who had to smuggle drugs to pay for his father's treatment. They might not be completely innocent, but this is repulsive and abhorrent for us to condemn them to death for just the mistake they made.
Exactly.
Thank you, ma'am. Even if many blameless drug mules are spared death penalty, this means opposition will not be able to deter the entry of drugs into society, which means the harms which they claim to be on society will still exist. Furthermore, the majority of drug runners will not be subjected to the death penalty and hence will continue to take the risk of trafficking. Thus, drug producers are often based in countries with weaker law enforcement and will simply not risk going to the field and handing the drug person. Now, the second rebuttal on harms. They brought up harms such as causes addiction and large amounts of death. Now, we disagree. As my first speaker has told you, we agree that drug trafficking is harmful and it should still be a crime punished by significant jail terms. However, opposition needs to show why these harms justify taking a life. The drug traffickers, whether the drug traffickers directly caused that they had the criminal intention to do so. The harms of drugs fall into two categories, either result in accidental death or other side effects. Firstly, in cases of accidental death, the drug trafficker did not directly cause death as a result of his trafficking. For a murderer who pulls the trigger of a gun and fires the bullet to take a life, we can charge him for murder and use death penalty as a punishment because the person is dead. However, for drug traffickers, they're being charged for producing the drug and bringing it into the country, and after these actions, no one is dead. Now, we believe that deaths result from accidental overdoses or unclean syringes. Traffickers might need to blame someone for taking them. However, the blame is not wholly on their shoulders. Furthermore, they do not have any rational incentive to end the lives of their clients. There isn't any evil intent to kill. The death penalty is too harsh in these circumstances. In case of side effect to this bodily harm and pain, the death penalty is grossly disproportionate. The justice system can never be morally worse or more violent than the criminal, because doing so makes us no better than them. This means that we can only cross the threshold of life when the crime which has occurred has taken a life also. Lastly, on that same their side, interest of people.
So,
thank you, ma'am. My first speaker has already told you 5 key points. That potential drug runners are so desperate that even with death penalty, and no matter how secret they feel like this, they will not be deterred. And there are more people out there who want to traffic drugs than the opportunities available. And drug producers and gates of drug rings are seldom, if ever, caught. So the death penalty appears unrealistic and unlikely to ever threaten them. Drug producers can pay drug runners more to mitigate the fear of death penalty. Lastly, drug producers most of the time deceive drug runners by not telling them what is in store for them and what are the consequences. Their only response to all this is to say that is not true because death is something which causes fear, and jail allows them to jail does not cause that much fear in them. Now, let me give you yes, ma'am.
What use is money if you're dead?
What use is money if you're dead? I do not know where I mentioned that speech, but I do know that if you're dead, you will not be able. If you're dead, you lose all connections, and it's something which is unrealistic, and you're not even trust reality. So moving on, let me give you one reason why defense fails. Many drug traffickers themselves are addicted to particularly to drug couriers and workers. Now, they work in drug syndicates for money. Therefore, even if we agree that the death penalty is an effective deterrent, and let's be clear, we don't. There are other serious crimes out there like child abuse, horrible honesty, and gang assaults, and all these make it extremely harmful. And by opposition's logic, we should use the death penalty in all these cases. With that, let me quickly move on to my substantive. The thesis of this point is that many drug traffickers are able to rehabilitate themselves and deserve a chance to rebuild their lives. The majority of drug traffickers commit the crime out of desperation or personal grief, and my first speaker has told you, unlike the criminals out there who murder. Also, for example, Arun Sukumaran and Andrew Cha from Bali 9 received death penalty. However, while on death row, they have realized the consequences of drugs, and for the last 7 years, they've been running workshops to help drug addicts turn their lives around. Andrew is a prison ministry and Bible class, while Myron teaches art and painting to help convicts express themselves. Ex-prisoners who were in chronic prison with them also agree that these programs help them learn and find the meaning of life. We say that it is cruel and callous of the opposition to be unable to look at these men beyond their worst mistake. Even if the criminal must spend the rest of his or her life in prison, and even lifetime imprisonment does not dictate that prisoners can no longer bring meaning to the lives of others. However, killing somebody just because he has trafficked drugs does mean that he cannot bring change to others' lives, which is why for all these reasons I'm proud to propose.
Which my boss, because it's already proven to you in her speech, right? And you think that hence the harm six magic bags of drugs out of nowhere. They won't know that where these sources of drugs come from. I think that these are information that are crucial to policing and will help in the process of improving anti-drug and drug enforcement, right? Which I will be moving furthering in my substantive today. And you also think that even if they do not have enough information, right, I think that there are a lot of other mitigating factors that we have already put in our entire policy. We think that we consider, for example, economic duress when these people are actually desperate. We think that these are factors we consider that if they are desperate and have other mitigating factors, we will give them life sentences as we have already told you to do with our law speaker, right? So we think that they have not moving on, this
Majority of drug traffickers are usually desperate people, 90% of them, which means your policy does not even solve the idea of drugs entering society.
But we think that in this case, no matter, there are different levels of desperation, right? We think that even when you are desperate, we think that it doesn't mean that you're not evil. We think there are some people that, they do this for the economic sake. They do this to get the money, right? And we think that in this case, we cannot assume that these people are not evil just because of the fact that they are desperate. We think that this is when the judge will come in for his own discretion. We don't think it's something that we need to prove today. Now, moving on very quickly, about how they tell us that, the overdosing because of consumers and hence might be accidental. But we tell you that these drugs have already been supplied by full knowledge by these people, by the drug traffickers, right? They are the ones that provide the tools to these that they actively promote these fatal substances. They will push these drug addicts to get death. We think that this is enough murder intention by itself, and it does warrant a death penalty. And lastly, very quickly about does death penalty actually act as an effective deterrent? They tell us that the people will actually still take up this job, then even if because they're desperate. When we actually give them a POI about this, they tell us that yes, because of this, right, or when they're dead, they will cut off all ties. This is exactly the kind of decision calculus that these people will take into account, right? They tell you that the property agrees that traffickers are extremely money-minded. It means that they have some sort of economic calculus and benefit analysis. They understand that life actually ascribes different types of economic value. When you actually take none of the money that you earn is actually going to matter anymore. We think that even without economic calculus, the prospect of losing your life itself is horrible enough to tell you that losing your life means losing everything you have. Even if you're alive, you still can see your family, you can do things, right? But all these are lost when you are dead. So this is really life and death moving sparkles for all of these traffickers. Now, very quickly on to my positive material today. I'll be analyzing about how death penalty actually combats the drug culture. What exactly is the current drug culture? On the on-side, we need to understand that although societies have a general no tolerance for drugs, right? The subculture of drugs still operates and ingrained in the fringes of society. We need society to understand that there always exists a probability of this culture spreading and going to epidemic that pervade society, and we think that it's absolutely unacceptable. This possibility is especially dangerous because of how drugs inherently tempt and entice curiosity and can easily cause addiction after full consumption. And hence, we think that it's utmost important to have a strong countervailing force to remind the public every instant of time that the health and consequences of drugs to prevent the drug culture from ever infecting society. I argue that death penalty is exactly what's necessary to stand against this drug culture. I think firstly, death penalty combats the drug culture by creating a social condemnation of drugs. And allowing the punishment of death penalty to paint that the very transaction of these drugs, of selling and supplying these drugs, is something so sinister that it warrants a death penalty. Again, this creates an explicit societal condemnation that drugs are unacceptable, and it acts as an effective psychological barrier for any sort of first-time possible drug consumers. I think that this creates a very similar sense of awareness and security against these vices, and the social rejection of the drugs that really reduces the demand of drugs in society, combating drug culture. And more importantly, we think that on the second effect, the death penalty improves anti-drug enforcement. We need to understand that drug syndicates operate on an extremely complex underground network. That's the only way to break these networks, right, is to get as much information as possible from them. We think that when we have death penalty as a strong bargaining chip against these drug deals, right, we are able to extract information from them and be able to help these drug enforcement regimes. While the proposition aside to let traffickers off the hook and sit while drug culture takes over society, we are the ones that truly combat drug culture and combat these pounds of drugs. Go beside opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, 3 points of contention for the House today. Firstly, on the idea of proportionality. Secondly, on deterrence. And lastly, on the drug culture. Now, on the idea of proportionality, now what the previous speaker told us today is that murder and terrorism fall under the same category of crimes that create a culture of fear. However, this specific culture of fear is what these crimes thrive on. It it is also what motivates these crimes. People who murder and people who are terrorists actually want to instill this fear in people. However, drug trafficking is actually motivated by profit. There is zero malicious intent here. They are not trying to harm anyone. In fact, if drug traffickers could obtain profit by less harmful means, they definitely would. The very fact remains that it is hard for them to obtain profit, and most of them are in desperate circumstances in less developed countries. And so drug trafficking is what they turn to out of desperation, not that they are trying to hurt anyone. Therefore, we believe that because drug trafficking is not motivated by malice, but rather motivated by desperation, it does not warrant capital punishment.
So,
Thank you. And they also had no response to our substantive on rehabilitation. Now, when you take away everything that a person has by taking away his life, you effectively are not balancing the rights of a criminal against the harms present to society. Now, if you need any more evidence of rehabilitation, Rick Ross, a drug trafficker, who once sold several metric tons of drugs from 1982 to 1989, after a long jail term, he now speaks to youth about the harms of drugs. So this shows that even the worst drug traffickers are not incorrigible. Now, they also told us about the harm to society. But we do believe that this harm to society exists. We do regret it, but we don't believe it warrants the death penalty. And we believe that it is hypocritical of the state to be more violent than the criminal. This irreversible act of force is something that is not warranted because the criminal himself did not intend it and did not commit it. So the state would be ludicrous to claim that it is enforcing justice by killing the criminal. And lastly, on the idea of fatal substances. Well, ladies and gentlemen, what are these drugs? For instance, marijuana that would warrant the death penalty. It's less harmful than cigarettes, yet we are killing people for smuggling it. Ladies and gentlemen, the whole notion that this is a fatal substance is flawed and misinformed. Now on to my next point of contention on veterans. Now ladies and gentlemen, what they told us is that these people do have important information as to where the drugs came from. No, thank you. But we understand outside opposition that any smart drug kingpin would obviously place the drugs in somewhere far away from his main base for the drug courier to collect. He's not so stupid as to put it close to where he lives. And so we believe that any smart drug lord would not give any useful information to the individuals who are just trafficking the drugs for him. And we believe therefore that under Singapore's policy, it is impossible for these individuals to prove that they are cooperating with the police if they don't have useful information. They cannot get a certificate of proof that they are cooperating, and the death penalty will still be enforced on individuals that don't deserve it. And they also told us about this interesting idea, different levels of desperation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, okay, let's look at these two levels of desperation. So, if you say that these people are not desperate, and they did it on purpose, now we believe that either you can kill the 90% of desperate couriers, or you cannot kill these 90% of desperate couriers. We believe that either way that they enforce the death penalty, it is flawed. Because if you kill 90% of desperate couriers, it means you are killing the pregnant mother who was only trying to earn a quick buck. Or you kill the 18-year-old individual who was only trying to save his dying father. Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that this is intolerable. But if you don't kill these individuals, you spare them because you have mercy. We believe that you are not making any impact on the drug trade at all. Because if you don't kill 90% of the couriers, then you are effectively not doing anything. The last 10% are drug kingpins who are smart enough to be holed up in shady lands in Colombia and Mexico where they will not be found. Effectively, your policy is redundant because you don't kill anyone. And onto the idea of whether a criminal still can use money after he's dead. Now, obviously, he can't use money after he's dead. But why does he still go for it? Because criminals undergo a hyper-discounted process where they do not rationally perceive the risks. This means that even if they are likely to be caught and killed, they will not take it as a realistic threat because the monetary incentive is too distracting. Now, ladies and gentlemen, last of all, deterrence is not the final word in injustice. No, thank you. If deterrence was the final word in injustice, we would take 4 thoroughbred stand-ins and quarter robbers. We would tear them apart from them. We would pour boiling hot acid down the throats of con men. But why don't we do this? Because we believe in humanity. Over the last 4 centuries, human reasoning has adapted to the point where we no longer want to torture people because we believe that it is wrong and inhumane. Therefore, we believe that we would much rather have 1 or 2 more drug traffickers than to impose the capital punishment on people who did not do anything to deserve it. Now, lastly, quickly onto the drug culture. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what they told us today is that the drug culture tempts these young individuals. That an underground network is there, and that is necessary to break it. However, we believe that increasing the harshness of the punishment has not worked and will never work. Because increasing the harshness of the punishment, according to the National Narcotics Bureau of the United States, actually caused an increase in drug trafficking. So ladies and gentlemen, if your policy does not deter anything, but rather increases the crime you're trying to prevent, then we believe that it's completely useless. And we believe that our alternatives are far better. For instance, by reducing the evidential burden required to convict a criminal. If it is easier for the prosecution to get a criminal convicted for trafficking drugs, we believe that criminals are far more likely to perceive this as a realistic threat because they understand that they are more likely to be caught and punished. Therefore, we believe that harshness is not a good solution in this case. And for all these reasons, I am proud to propose.
Tells us in today's debate that 90% of drug use out there are desperate. They're doing it for the money, they're coerced, they're pressured. But we tell you that our policy is the one that protects these desperate people. Why do we say so? That's because we have the death penalty. We have the utmost deterrence that could possibly be in the legal system. We are trying to put the strongest countervailing force in these people's cost-benefit analysis, in these people's skills of mind, to deter them from committing drug trafficking, to deter them from committing drug trafficking even if they are desperate. Our side is the one that truly tries to protect these people by putting out the most effective deterrence possible. Very simply, we have 2 points of contention. Firstly, what's crime warrant the death penalty? And secondly, how does our policy combat drug culture? First point of contention, what crimes warrant the death penalty? So, right from the start, they told us, fine, death penalty can only be warranted for intentional killings, which means that firstly, death must occur, and secondly, there must be the intention to murder and kill. Well, firstly, we definitely tell you that death does occur from drug trafficking. Every day in the United States, 120 people die as a result of drug overdose, and illegal drugs cause at least 250,000 global deaths yearly. Death by drugs are very real and very happening. We don't see how they ignore this altogether. But more than that, we think that death isn't the only criteria to begin with. There's also such a thing as crime against society. But when you kidnap someone, but when you commit treason, when you commit espionage, when you instill a culture of fear, we think these are crimes that don't necessarily cause death, but warrant death penalty too. Why so? Because these cause a collective and very systemic harm to society, resulting in eventual breakdown. What does drug trafficking do? It pushes drug addicts to desperation, forces them to commit more crimes for money, results in torn familial relationships, creates drug enclaves and subcultures. How do we say that this isn't a collective systemic harm that we are causing? But more than that, when it comes to the intention to murder and kill, what exactly is a murderous intent? It's easy to understand it as a person thinking, I want him to die, I want to kill him. But these intentions are more often than not much more insidious and less superficial as that. A drug trafficker may not want to stab or kill the consumer, but they actively push them towards death. Why do I say so? They are the ones who supply them the drugs. They are the ones who supply the drugs while knowing the fatal effects of these drugs simply without, and they sell it anyway for their own benefit. Murderous intent can also be understood as someone committing an act, knowing that it could be fatal and doing it without any excuse. This doesn't necessarily have to have a premeditated killing intent. We think that they still have the murderous intent in drug trafficking. But afterwards, yes sir?
I believe I'm really clear and substantive that many of these drug traffickers are not well educated and thus are not aware of the consequences of drug trafficking.
I'm going to be dealing with that later. So they told us that addicts are also to blame because they are the ones who accidentally overdose and they made the choice to consume the drugs anyway. So why are we making drug traffickers fully liable? Let me explain to you the abusive relationship between the drug trafficker and the drug addict. We think these traffickers knowingly target these individuals' demands for drugs and are the ones who force them into addiction. Well, firstly, we need to understand that traffickers' most lucrative customers are the addicts, the long-term customers. They've given free samples, they start by giving them free samples, lure them into drug addiction, and they start selling them more drugs at higher and higher prices, fuel it, and more importantly, supplying their addiction. They abuse their vulnerabilities, the fact that they're addicted, and are very aware of the fatal effects, but they still actively sell as much as possible. Anyway, traffickers are people who intentionally sell these desperate people, these people who are blinded by the need for money. Because when you put their life at stake, that's the greatest thing they could possibly put at stake. Because when they lose their life, they lose every single thing they own. Not just their money, not just their ability to spend money or earn money, but also any other rights that they own. They lose their family, they lose their rights to do things, to spend time. They can have the death penalty in place, the strongest possible deterrence. And that's why we are protecting these desperate people. Because we are trying to deter them from even committing drug trafficking to begin with. The outside tells us that 90% of drug use are desperate. Yes, but what do they do to deter them, to stop them from drug trafficking? We need them to tell us. This is precisely what makes our side so different from theirs, because we protect these desperate people. And more importantly, moving on to the second point of contention, how does our policy combat drug cultures? Firstly, they told us that drug traffickers don't actually kill anyone. But I will prove to you that that's really not true. But secondly, they told us that that is without a death penalty, it's only then that they can provide rehabilitation, they can give these drug traffickers like Rick Ross the chance to change. But we think that rehabilitation is going to happen on our side too. When people face mitigating circumstances, the pressure, the coerce by syndicates, then we think it's possible to spare them the death penalty and give them other sentences. But at the same time, there will be rehabilitation to try to get them to change. And this is precisely why we also have rehabilitation to begin with. But if we really look at their argument, it's a very generic argument. Because if we extend their logic, would it mean that murderers can also change too? Because anyone who does any crime can change. But why are they willing to give death penalty for intentional killers? We think that in fact, sometimes drug traffickers can be worse than these people because they knowingly and intentionally sell these drugs to people, even if they know it's fatal and can very well kill them. This is precisely why I am so proud to oppose.
Never actually came up with a policy to help these people. But we think there are also drug use that aren't actually caused, that aren't
idea of discretion approach to drug trafficking is just or even effective. As a matter of fact, and as a matter of consciousness, the answer is no. Let's first take a walk inside the opposition's world. This was a world that was disproportionate, one which tarred drug traffickers with the same brush as mass murderers, such as Timothy McVeigh and Ted Bundy. We told you continuously that drug traffickers did not directly take the lives of their victims, and they would not have the intention to do so, because if they would do, then they would lose their revenue. And nor did they ever, and it was something which they never said anything about. This was a world which was naively built on fear. In this world, drug traffickers still come into their country because drug lords are more capable of adapting to a side of opposition policy. This means paying traffickers more, telling them less about their operation, and this means deceiving them more. The way Parmar and Maswan deceived. Now we spoke a lot about discretion. This was a world that is reductive, one which would set up itself as a lofty aspiration of ending the drug war, but cocked up when it mattered by just pumping discretion. Discretion means forgiving the mass majority of drug traffickers, which would mean that if you were to forget the 90% of drug traffickers, they would not be deterred by such a policy, and they would still bring drugs into their world, which would mean their world would still have the harms which they portray, the harms to society and the killings, so they never solved the problem with drugs. They dropped our main examples on the Bali 9. These were clear examples of how rehabilitation worked. And also they dropped our example on Rick Ross on rehabilitation. They kept on shouting out this idea on 250,000 people. We already responded to them by saying that drug traffickers did not kill these 250,000 people. What they did was just pass the drug packet to these 250,000 people, and the deaths were, like I said, caused by accidental issues or not overuse of instruments. They questioned us on how we solved the drug trafficking problem. We kept on shouting out to their world that rehabilitation was a solution. Or we agreed that we do tell them as much as they do, but we allow rehabilitation to occur in our world. Then they went on to characterize drug traffickers as money-minded. Exactly why they characterized them as money-minded, this proved that their intent was to earn money, which is why at the end of the day, their intent was not to kill. So now with that, let's jump into Ops world. Our world was the first and foremost was justice when it combated drug trade through imprisonment, consistency, and rehabilitation. We deter drug traffickers by making conviction luckier. The death penalty exists in our world, but only under select circumstances of crimes like murder, shooting, and terrorism. In our world, we recognize that it is wrong to take out all our frustration on drug traffickers. They may have committed the crime, but it should not preclude us from being fair and impartial. Ladies and gentlemen, the blood of drug traffickers who have suffered the death penalty is in our hands, and I beg this House to wash them clean. For all these reasons, please vote side proposition.